The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The topic of transparency in government is an important topic that's much bigger than any one administration, but it's been a topic that Donald Trump has pandered about for a very long time. Donald Trump promised that his administration would be the most transparent. One of his advisors, Kellyanne Conway, has been a sort of regular fixture on television saying that Donald Trump's administration is, in fact, the most transparent. And it's obviously never been true. And we have a new example of this. A couple of days ago, Donald Trump ended a requirement from the Obama era where the government was required to publish a yearly report with numbers of how many people were killed in drone strikes and counterterrorism operations, not in war zones where the United States is engaged. Donald Trump has revoked that requirement via an executive order. Last year, the Trump administration simply didn't publish it. Now they are ending the requirement to do it. And the reason that we have this in the first place is that under Barack Obama, there were complaints, rightly so. I was one of the people complaining that his administration was simply not being transparent about drone strikes in many countries, countries like Pakistan and Somalia, but Libya, Yemen. So the Obama administration put in this requirement, and that requirement has now been canceled by Donald Trump. There are really serious debates to be had about the specifics of drone warfare. There are legal debates. Are drone strikes legal? Are they sometimes legal, or always legal, or never legal? And if they are sometimes legal, when and under what circumstances? And what law governs them? Are they moral, which is a whole other can of worms that could be opened up about drone strikes? What is an acceptable level, if any, I should say, of collateral damage as a result of drone policy? And is any level of that collateral damage acceptable? Are we in the net at the end of the day killing more or fewer people because the drone program exists than if it didn't exist? Because remember, if we didn't have drones, we wouldn't necessarily be doing nothing about some of those people we're targeting. We might still be going after them, but in ways that could lead to more people being killed. That's an argument that is sometimes made. These are all debates that we could have about drone strikes, and we should have about drone strikes. But how can we even have those debates if the administration is hiding even more numbers about drone strikes around the world? There is no national security justification for canceling this reporting. The information that was being published was not nearly specific enough that it would cause any kind of security issues. And before we get to the bigger picture, there's also an element of hypocrisy here, because under Barack Obama, Republicans pretended to care about drone strikes. They pretended to care about the number. They pretended to care about the locations and the legality and the tactics and the strategy behind Barack Obama's use of drone strikes. All of a sudden, under Donald Trump, it doesn't matter anymore, and they don't even care if the transparency around the number is eliminated by Donald Trump. The bigger picture issue, as usual, is Donald Trump's transparency. He promised to be way more transparent than Barack Obama. He promised to be the most transparent president in history. His advisors have claimed credit for him for being the most transparent president in history. And the reality is that he's one of the least transparent modern presidents. Drone strikes, which we just talked about today. Tax returns. Every other candidate and president dating back who knows how many decades has released their tax returns. Donald Trump said he would maybe in the future, refused to do it, has not released his tax returns. Press briefings under other administrations, they often would take place daily, at least weekly. They would be at least somewhat substantive. They would have some reasonable duration during which a number of questions could be asked. Under the Trump administration, few and far between, even further and further between over time, extraordinarily short. One time, I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders gave like a 5-minute press briefing. and of course, riddled with lies and distortions, partially probably because Sarah Huckabee Sanders doesn't even know what Donald Trump's position is on many issues, partially because they are obfuscating because so many issues are just disadvantageous for them to talk about. And we actually have data around this. The Sunlight Foundation tracks government transparency and administration transparency, and the Trump administration is an absolute and total joke. And this is just more of the same. Promises made and promises not kept. The transparency promises have been a joke. There was never even the mere possibility that Donald Trump was going to stick to it. We talked on yesterday's program about the promises that have been made by Donald Trump on both two types of deficits, the federal budget deficit and the national trade deficit. Those promises have obviously not been kept. Promises with regard to successes that he would be having geopolitically, Israeli-Palestinian peace, North Korea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Promises made and promises not kept is sort of the bigger picture theme of this administration. And then when it comes to transparency, it's huge promises around transparency and a move to be one of the least transparent administrations in recent time. This is not praise of Barack Obama, okay? My criticisms of Barack Obama were extensive and numerous. They included drone policy. They included lack of transparency. They included a lot of the handling and dealing with whistleblowers. This is not a Obama was great on this issue thing. And in fact, the reason we had this drone reporting requirement was because of the lack of transparency that people correctly assessed with Barack Obama. Trump is just even worse on this issue. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. I would love to hear from you about this. You can also follow the show on Twitter at David Pacman Show. After the break, we will go to the phones. Many people wanting to talk to me today, and I will talk to some of them next.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Doris Lyon. Doris, thank you for being a David Pacman Show member. We're mostly funded by really great people like Doris who sign up at www.joinpacman.com. Also want to say thanks to Catherine White. Catherine's been a member for almost 5 years, and she is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Catherine and Doris, thanks so much to both of you. And again, please join them at www.joinpacman.com. Okay, let's go to the phones at 617-830-4750, see what's on people's minds. Let's start with our caller from the 603 area code. Caller from 603, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, David, this is Andy calling from Nashville, New Hampshire.
All right, Andy, we can barely hear you, and please tell me we're not on speakerphone.
No, yeah, we're not. Is that better?
It's marginally better. What's on your mind?
I was just wondering what your thoughts of raising the minimum wage or universal basic income were.
You're saying one versus the other, or what are my thoughts on them independently?
Yeah, like one versus the other, because I know Bernie Sanders supports raising the minimum wage, and then Andrew Yang supports UBI.
Yep, I'm for both of them. So they're sort of independent issues. One is as we rethink our relationship to work on the basis of automation and other economic changes, should we be looking into providing some kind of base level of income to everybody in a way that will be economically stimulative? And I believe that the answer is yes. And I think that there's a lot of really good proposals for that. On the other hand, when we talk about a minimum wage that should be raised, part of the reason that we shouldn't allow the conversation about the minimum wage to be ignored when we talk about UBI is we don't want UBI to subsidize low wages for employers. Employers should be paying living wages, and we don't want to sort of bail them out and allow them to pay wages that are lower than those paid in 1968, inflation adjusted, merely because we've put in place universal basic income. So I think we need to do both.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for the call. Great to hear from you. Okay, let's go next to our caller from the 770 area code. Caller from 770, What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is more like of a motive question. Okay, so some people actually believe this is a Donald Trump question, more like his followers. Some people actually believe him what he says, but do you think some people like simply support him simply for partisan reasons? You know, like he's a Republican, I'm a Republican, and it doesn't matter how much he lies, I'm going to support my party no matter how crazy it is.
Of course. I think that you can categorize Trump supporters into three categories effectively, okay? There are people who are ignorant. In other words, they just don't have all the information, and they've decided that on the basis of the information they have, which is incomplete, that they are going to support Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two is people who, and I don't say this to ridicule anyone or to make fun of anybody, there are people who are cognitively limited who simply don't understand what it is that they're doing. It's not that they don't have all the information. There's some kind of cognitive limitation. They just don't understand stuff and how the world works. And then number three, there's what I call sort of bad people. And I know that it's an umbrella term and it's not a totally fair term, but it's people who either for partisan reasons, for what people like Jonathan Haidt call groupishness, are deciding that even though they understand what it is Donald Trump is and what it is he is doing, that they're going to vote for him anyway. And the partisanship you describe can be one of those reasons.
Okay, thank you. Shalom Aleichem.
All right. Thank you so much. Great to hear from you. Okay. Next caller is from the 917 area code. Caller from 917. Who's there? What's on your mind today? 917, you might have us muted. Take us off mute if that's the case. 917, last opportunity. I'm going to have to hang out. There's 917 all of a sudden. What, did you have us on mute?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm calling about the Ilhan Omar controversy in particular, and the way in which the progressive media talks about anti-Semitism concerns by the Jewish community in general. I have been, I listen to a lot of the sort of progressive media that you're sort of in that sphere, and there's been this narrative about the concern over Ilhan Omar's comments recently that this is all a smear campaign, that it is rooted either they say this explicitly or implicitly in an Islamophobic, attack on who she is. It's sort of part of some like white supremacist, whatever. And listening to that media as somebody who shares the concerns that people have voiced about her comments and about things in like the Labour Party in Britain and other things has been a really emotionally distressing experience because this is not a smear campaign. There are people who are genuinely concerned about something. And I understand if people who are not sort of attuned to the tropes of anti-Semitism and the way that plays into a politics don't understand why people are upset. But they can sit down and have a good faith discussion rather than attacking it. And I wonder, as somebody who seems to sort of understand where these concerns are coming from, how you think one ought to address and how you are maybe interested in addressing these narratives in the progressive media about what's going on. Sorry if I went on for a little too long there.
Okay, so here's how I would approach it. You're absolutely right that there are people on both sides who are just having bad faith conversations. And let me give you one example. You have, for example, I as a Jewish person, when I said, hey, I don't think that her tweets are evidence of anti-Semitism. I don't think that her tweets are evidence of deliberately perpetuating anti-Semitic tropes, but I think that they really weren't well thought out and inadvertently refer to some of those anti-Semitic tropes, which is a pretty even comment, right? I'm saying I'm not accusing her of anti-Semitism or anything, but here's where I think that she might have kind of stuck her foot in her mouth. I'm immediately told that I'm a shill who is biased by being Jewish, and therefore my opinion is effectively zeroed out on this issue. Now, if I wanted to argue in bad faith, the equivalent would be for me to tell anyone who's not Jewish, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not Jewish. You simply don't have all of the information that would be required because anti-Semitism isn't something that you've studied in detail for your entire life. You're the one who simply lacks the information to even assess this situation. Like, I could say that, but I think I would be acting in bad faith. Why do I say that that would be in bad faith? We would all be much better off if, when we get into this type of disagreement, we say, okay, rather than attributing subterfuge or some kind of secret agenda to the other person, be the agenda Islamophobia or pro-Israeli bias or whatever, let's assume that the other person is arguing in good faith, and let's figure out how they came to that conclusion. That, I think, would be a much better way of starting an in good faith conversation, rather than smearing the opposition or attributing, secret motives to what it is that has gotten them to where they are. And very few people are actually willing to do that.
And can I ask quickly? Why do you think, when I see this, I'm coming from the perspective of having also followed, 7 people resigned, 7 Jewish members of the Labor Party resigned recently because of anti-Semitism there. Yep. This is a very real phenomenon. And it seems that people, and we can point to particular progressive shows on YouTube that have talked about this, are entirely unwilling to accept the idea that Jews are in good faith concerned about anti-Semitism. And when in fact, if you listen to the way that either Ilhan Omar specifically or the people who defend her talk about the allegations, there's this constant suggestion of, even if you don't realize you're being Islamophobic, you actually are. And I totally am open to the possibility that I harbor a bias I'm not aware of. I think that's part of being a progressive person in this age, is recognizing you might have prejudices that are internalized, and yet nobody seems willing to do that same self-criticism in the context of anti-Semitism. And that seems like a really deep problem, that there's this one prejudicial blind spot that no one will acknowledge.
Yep. And listen, if you can be unconsciously Islamophobic, then of course you can be unconsciously anti-Semitic. And so dismissing that conceptually is logically fallacious. But here, I'll say this as I get ready to move on. If you want evidence of how many people are arguing in bad faith on this issue, we're going to take this call that is wrapping up now. We're going to put it on YouTube. You and I had a conversation about how can we get people to have more meaningful and substantive conversations? How can we solve problems? There's no reason whatsoever that somebody should see this clip and be furious, but it is going to be riddled with both dislikes on YouTube and absolutely horrible comments. And there's absolutely no reason for it. And that will be the proof of exactly what it is you're describing.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate the call. Thank you so much. 617-830-4750. A lot of people holding. Let's go to a number that I've never seen before, and I'm curious what it is. It's a 4 and then a whole bunch of zeros. I don't know if this is a country code or what it is, but who's calling from number 40 trillion or whatever it is? They may not even know who it is because the number is so weird, and they hung up. Very, very odd. That was interesting. I thought we were going to have maybe from another planet or something like that. Okay, let's go to our caller from the 267 area code. Who's calling from 267 today?
It should be Jimmy from Philly.
Hey, Jimmy, what's going on?
Well, David, I hear you talking about arguing in good faith and meaningful conversations, and yet the way I heard you just describe Trump supporters was in bad faith. You gave 3 subsections. 1, they're ignorant. 2, they're retarded. Or 3, they're bad people. How is that a good faith argument? Tell me that, David. How is that having a meaningful conversation?
Well, explain to me someone who's outside of those 3 categories.
Me.
Okay, why'd you vote for Trump?
What do you mean, why'd I vote for Trump? My God, the reasons are because I can't stand politicians. Because they've been lying to us for years.
Hey, hold on a second. Let's take them one by one. If you voted for Trump because you don't like politicians, I would consider that an ignorant reason to vote for Trump. Your second reason was because other politicians lie. Trump lies all the time. That's also not a good reason to vote for Trump.
Trump does not lie all the time. That's people like you.
Jimmy, hold on a second. Let's take it one step at a time. The 2 reasons you cited for voting for Trump, I would characterize as extraordinarily ignorant. So you're not providing.
Of course you would, because you don't like Trump. Of course you would.
No,
there's no good faith.
Jimmy.
Is there anything good about Trump, David?
Jimmy,
let me ask you that.
Hold on a second, Jimmy. If you called and you said, I voted for any candidate because politicians lie, I would consider that an ignorant reason. It has nothing to do with
now you describe that. How is that ignorant? Because it's true. Politicians do lie. Let's face it. We know it. We all know this.
Why would that be? Why does the fact that politicians
because I think a business because I think a
Jimmy,
businessman.
If you keep interrupting me, I'm going to hang up on you. You still there, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. My question is, how is reaching the decision to vote for any particular candidate because in history politicians have lied, not ignorant?
You're adding more to it. I can't just give you a soundbite answer, David.
Jimmy, why are you so angry?
Because you just insulted every Trump supporter. And I don't like that, David. You're disingenuous.
No, actually, I was completely genuine in my analysis.
No, you weren't.
Hold on a second.
Number
Jimmy.
one, they're
Jimmy,
ignorant. Number two, they're retarded. Or number three, they're bad people.
Jimmy.
I mean, come on, David. How is that a good faith argument?
Jimmy, can we take it one step at a time, or is that not possible?
David, you know what? You're annoying. I'm hanging up on you.
Okay, thank you. Man, Jimmy just shot out of a cannon. Okay, let's go next to... Where do we want to go next? Let's go to the 213 area code. Caller from 213. What's on your mind? Who's this?
213?
Yeah, that's you.
Oh, wow. I thought it was a 909. Oh, okay. It's my phone number. Anyway, I have two questions. One is kind of long, so I'm going to just hint at it for later. This one's a lot better for the show. You touched on this a bit before, and I wanted you to comment on it some more. The media coverage for Bernie Sanders last year, I think they're able to do a little bit more against him because he was so late to the election, his name recognition wasn't out there. But this year, it's like, are they really going to do it for this long? Like, what are some of the ways that you think they're going to try to do it, like, for we can look out for? And I've noticed, new people online popping up with their own news and stuff like that. Like, some of the things to look out for, ways we can combat that, and what's
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding. You're saying how is Bernie going to be smeared this time versus in 2016? You're saying?
Yeah, like how are they going to keep it up till the election? Like for this long, they were able to keep it up last time because he was late to the election. But this time he's early. Everybody's early. Are they going to block his coverage for a whole year and a half?
No, I don't think so. No. So listen, Bernie Sanders is the front runner on the Democratic side right now. So I did a segment.
Yeah, but you wouldn't know it by watching the.
Yeah. So on the basis of polling, name recognition, and fundraising, I think it's undeniable that Bernie's the front runner right now. If there's going to be an establishment move against Bernie, and there probably already sort of is, but it's not super large right now. It's probably going to be an argument along the lines of, number one, a lot of other candidates share a lot of Bernie's positions now, so his positions are no longer unique in the way that they were in 2016, and therefore, since his positions are similar to many other candidates, does it make sense to vote for the 70-something-year-old white guy rather than bringing in someone else with a different identity? Does it make sense to vote for the guy who's not even really a Democrat is another way that they'll say it. So I think that that's going to sort of be the anti-Bernie framing for 2020.
Well, I kind of get that because, they've already started doing some of that. But what I mean is he drew those huge crowds at his rallies and it hardly got any coverage, 30 seconds on NBC or something like that, how long can they keep that up? Not covering over the weekend, I don't know exactly how much coverage Bernie's rally got, but I am not yet seeing that he is getting sort of iced out. I'm not seeing that right now, but soon we should have data about how much time each network is devoting in terms of coverage to each candidate. But I'll keep an eye on it and report back to you once we have more information. Yeah, I'm already seeing a little pattern. I'm hoping he finds a way, because he's found a way through a lot of the setup questions that they brought to him, but I really hope he finds a way around the non-coverage he's been getting,
Yep, we'll follow it and we'll absolutely report on it. I appreciate the call. Thank you very, very much. Let's go to our caller from the 815 area code. Caller from 815. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Jonathan. I'm from Rockford, Illinois.
Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind?
Hi. So my question, it's a bit of a two-parter, but I think I'll just ask the first part in case. So for last election in 2016, you know, the hot issue, I think most people will agree would be immigration. This year for 2020, well, coming up 2020, it's probably more or less going to be probably single-payer healthcare, and, you know, obviously Donald Trump. And so my question is a little bit, you know, for it's never too, I guess, early for politicians to look too ahead. So for like 2024, you know, it's just the nature of the political beast. People are already probably trying to, you know, plan their way out there. And so for me, I was wondering, in your opinion, this year's healthcare, which was brought by Bernie, Andrew Yang bringing up, you know, UBI, do you think that would be the next hot issue for just any platform in 2024, or do you think it'd be some other issue that you think is not being, you know, covered as much?
Listen, I can't even tell you what the main issues are going to be within the Democratic primary debates in 6 months or whenever it is that they start. So I wouldn't even venture a guess as to what are going to be the issues of 2024. I think big picture, what you're going to see is that as the sort of crisis of inequality and wages and employment and technological automation deepens, you are going to see more and more focus on what is your plan to deal with the changing status quo of our relationship to work. And this includes everything from wages, wealth inequality, taxation would fall under that. Because of its economic impact, healthcare is also going to be a discussion there. So if I had to pick an umbrella, that's where it would be. Also being aware of the fact that as the climate change crisis gets worse and worse, it will be sort of unavoidable that also becomes prevalent. But as far as 2024 or the 2022 midterms, I just don't know. I think it's just way too early to know.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And so do you think, so like I said before, Bernie was kind of like, you know, the dark horse for the last election. Do you think in this election, you know, someone like Andrew Yang, who's bringing, you know, UBI up to, you know, the platform, do you think he might be someone that, you know, people might latch on to just as they did in Bernie in like 2016?
I mean, I think that it would be fascinating if Andrew Yang did get that surge in support. His fundraising's going pretty well. He's getting more and more media interviews. He's one of my top 3. So I hope that does happen and that he has a more prominent voice in the 2020 Democratic primary for sure.
Okay, well, definitely. Those are all my questions, so thank you for answering them.
All right, thank you so much for the call. I appreciate it. Let's go to a break. If you are holding, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to you, but there are like 40 people holding, and we will take more calls next week, and I look forward to hearing from more people.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, for this week's classic interview, we're going to one that's a little risky to go back to because we are now the subject of anger on the behalf of many of this person's supporters. But we interviewed this guy named A Goodman back in January of 2016. He appeared on the show. He said Bernie will win, and Bernie didn't win. And then A Goodman became a sort of conspiracy theorist and said a lot of really horrible things about me, which is fine. I mean, I don't mind on a personal level, but I found it interesting. And we are revisiting my interview with A Goodman today in the context of Bernie Sanders running again for president, this time for the 2020 nomination, and being, as I laid out for you on Monday, I believe the front runner if and until Joe Biden announces, Joe Biden, the only person doing better than Bernie in the polls, of course, Joe Biden, not a declared candidate. So let's get back to my interview with A Goodman from January of 2016 and sort of think about it in the context of everything we learned since. I'm joined today by A Goodman, who is an author, columnist, journalist, and contributor to the Huffington Post, The Hill, Salon, and numerous other publications. Based on my understanding of your recent articles, you seem very sure that Bernie Sanders is not only going to be the Democratic presidential candidate, but he is also going to be the next president of the United States. It seems to say it's an optimistic reading may be a bit of an understatement. I mean, tell us why you're so sure Bernie is going to be the next president.
Well, when you look at what he's done, David, from last year to today. Okay, so let's recap what Bernie Sanders has been able to do without media coverage.
All right.
Okay, without a super PAC, without the help of the Democratic National Committee. He went from, if you look at polls, okay, and if you think polls are gospel, he went from 0.8% in late 2014, less than 1%, to now over 40%, 41% in one poll. Because there's a recent poll that said he's 7 points nationally from Hillary Clinton.
Right. Okay,
that was just the other day. So he did all that, in addition to breaking Barack Obama's record for contributions. So he has 2.3 million contributions. So he went from virtually unknown in the polls to now 7 points behind Hillary Clinton. He has campaign contributions, 2.3 million. He's at twice the pace now of Barack Obama in terms of campaign contributions. Hillary Clinton's lead is slipping faster in 2016 than it did in 2008. And he's doing all of this with a lot of media pundits, maybe not you, maybe not me, maybe not others, but a lot of media pundits saying he can't do it.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, as far as he can't do it, we're fans of Bernie's on this program. I believe that there is clearly a path to victory for Bernie Sanders, but it is by no means a foregone conclusion. Everything you've said is true, although you know the average of recent polls still puts Bernie Sanders behind Hillary Clinton nationally by about 15 points. But I think right now the most important sort of analysis to do is how are things looking in the first four primary states, right? And if we look at Iowa, Bernie Sanders is maybe tied within the margin of error, maybe slightly behind. A new poll has him well ahead in New Hampshire, sort of in an average of New Hampshire polls, he's ahead. And then when you look at Nevada and South Carolina, he's behind and very far behind. So there's certainly a path here. But when I read your article saying, hey, Bernie is going to be the next president, I'm not seeing anything that gives me that level of confidence. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay, so this is why maybe I'm the only one, but this is why I think he'll have a commanding. I would not be surprised if he has a dominant landslide victory, and here's why.
Yeah.
The primary reason that Hillary Clinton is up at all, the primary reason is not her record. It's not her record on racial issues. It's not her record in foreign policy. Okay, because one leading historian in the sorry, one leading historian. Yeah, sorry about it. One leading historian in the New York Times says she'll have a neocon foreign policy. So it's not all these things that are record. You can't really, cite her experience, because she cites the experience, or Clinton supporters do, but the experience doesn't correlate to why somebody would say, "Oh, this is good judgment."
Well, you're sort of mixing. I think there's two important issues that you're mentioning there.
I'll get to exactly my point. My point is this. I believe wholeheartedly that Bernie will win Iowa and New Hampshire. Once he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, the floodgates, there'll be a tsunami of media attention. Once that media attention takes place that he didn't receive, so he didn't receive hardly any media attention in terms of him being able to win, him being able to break the paradigm of Clinton's inevitability. Once he gets that media attention from Iowa and New Hampshire wins, her aura of inevitability, Clinton's aura of inevitability, will be shattered. Once that goes, and then people start saying, wait a second now, let's look at Clinton's record from a critical thinking vantage point. Now pundits are going to say, wait a second, she already has the FBI investigation. Bernie's already on her heels right now. When you add in Iowa and New Hampshire wins, and I truly believe because she already has a southern firewall that she started in September. So back in September, the Clinton campaign already feared Bernie in Iowa and New Hampshire. There was an email that said, did Hillary Clinton diss the Iowa caucus? And she basically referred to the caucuses as creatures of the party's extremes. So she pretty much knows that, and she finished third in Iowa in 2008. So she pretty much knows that Bernie has a very, very good shot, regardless of what any polls say now. And he's already up in New Hampshire, and he's already up in a couple polls in Iowa. But I think that he'll beat Clinton in Iowa. He'll beat Clinton in New Hampshire. Once that happens, a tsunami of media attention. He'll win Nevada. I truly believe he'll win South Carolina based on her record on racial justice issues.
All right. Well, I mean, the fact that you truly believe that is sort of an interesting note. But in an effort to sort of stay as evidence-based here as possible, the path you describe is the path I've outlined as what would need to happen, which is Bernie Sanders comes out after Iowa and New Hampshire with somewhere between 45 and 55% of the delegates up to that point from those two states, and that on the heels of that, he gets momentum going into the to the third and fourth primaries, rather. But I think that there's one element of your analysis of Hillary Clinton's lead that is sort of missing, which is I don't disagree with you that Bernie Sanders is clearly more progressive than Hillary Clinton, particularly when we look at issues around banking, Wall Street, and certainly foreign policy. And there's no doubt also, as we've covered, that the Democratic National Committee, in part by scheduling debates on weekends, on holiday weekends, conflicting with big sporting events, etc., is working to help Hillary Clinton. But I don't think that's going to be the deciding factor in the end, because there is no doubt that Hillary Clinton is, number one, a very good debater. And to the extent that people hear about Bernie Sanders' progressive ideas and those resonate, that helps Bernie. But Hillary Clinton has done a very good job of sort of convincing people by her language in these debates that she's progressive too. And the name recognition is a big factor here. So while I don't disagree with you that the path forward is momentum from the first two primaries, I think you may be overstating the impact that that is going to have. I'm not saying I hope you're wrong. I'm not saying I hope you're wrong. Yeah. I just am. I don't know that it's this a guarantee that you see.
I could be. Look. I've been wrong in the past.
I'm sure.
But I could be overstating it. You're right.
Right.
I just think that what Bernie Sanders has been able to do in terms of achieving the success he's had is unprecedented when you don't have a super PAC, when you don't have media coverage, and when you don't have all the advantages that Trump and Clinton possess. I think that once he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, I think that he's well positioned to win both. Once he wins both, I think that the media coverage, the paradigm by which she's a good debater and all that stuff, it's true, she's a good debater. But when you analyze, when you look at her record from a critical thinking vantage point, which I don't think the media does, I think the media will do that after Bernie wins Iowa and New Hampshire. I think a huge impediment to the Sanders campaign is the belief among many in the media that he can't win. Once that is shattered by Iowa and New Hampshire wins, I think that's where my overall thesis lies. Once he gets Iowa and New Hampshire, and I understand I might be overly optimistic, I think that there's going to be just a tsunami, and not just in the media, online and social media throughout the country. People are already saying, hey, wait a second, this is amazing. Bernie Sanders is really doing well. When he proves that he can win, I think it's going to be a completely new ballgame.
All right, well, that
But
may be. And, I don't see right now, again, evidence-based. It seems that Bernie Sanders may be able to sort of tie in Iowa. We're very, very close. I don't see any evidence that suggests he's going to run away with Iowa in any way. But again, I don't think that that's absolutely necessary for him to have a path to victory. We will start having information about this very soon, and we will check in again with A Goodman and see how his predictions are doing at that time. We've been speaking with A Goodman, author, columnist, journalist, contributor to any number of publications. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you, David. Thanks for everything.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's get into audience questions for the week. I love this first one. It's from Kari, who says, "Hey, David, what happened to Rudy Giuliani? He completely disappeared. Does he even still work for Donald Trump?" So, as I've mentioned before, Rudy Giuliani was not Donald Trump's or is not Donald Trump's attorney, in the sense that it's an attorney who's going to represent you in court proceedings, for example. He's mostly a television attorney. He is an attorney in the legal sense. He has a law degree, and at one point he was a practicing attorney, a prosecutor in New York City with other credentials. But he's not worked as a real courtroom attorney for a very long time. So he's a guy who is called an attorney that can go on television and make arguments that sort of sound like they are legal arguments, but all along they were really propaganda arguments. They were not arguments meant to influence court proceedings, but rather arguments meant to influence public opinion. To that end, eventually, Rudy Giuliani's presence, quote, defending Trump on television, actually became completely counterproductive because of every embarrassment after embarrassment that Rudy Giuliani would participate in, saying A one day and then the next day saying the opposite of A, or saying, here's what the president said, and then the next day saying, that was a hypothetical quote of the president. Had he had a conversation with me about that, what I meant is that was something he could have said, which is crazy. I mean, it's completely out of this world, or malignantly ignorant to some degree. And after the most recent Rudy Giuliani implosion on television, which at this point was like, I mean, I want to say 4 weeks ago, but the way things go, maybe it was more like 6 weeks ago or something like that. We have not seen Rudy Giuliani. And I don't think it's a mere coincidence. There were reports, which we told you about at the time, that there was real concern in Trump's inner circle about how Rudy Giuliani is going on TV and making things even worse for Trump, not so much legally, but again, from a PR perspective. So I've not seen anything official about it. And I looked around this morning knowing that we were going to be answering this question today. It appears to me that it's sort of like when Kellyanne Conway talked about the Bowling Green massacre, which of course doesn't exist. And then we didn't see her on television for a whole bunch of time until she came back under more limited circumstances. It seems Rudy's been pulled because he's just not the best person. And we were told Trump was going to put the best people around him. That was obviously a joke and a lie from the beginning. Nobody really believed that, not anyone with any semblance of common sense. And Rudy has been pulled. I would be curious. Rudy was laying the groundwork for the Mueller report pretty early on, talking about what you wouldn't expect to see there and moving the goalposts so that when the Mueller report ultimately does come out, he can say something like, this is it. After all of this, this is all that's in the Mueller report. So eventually, Mueller is going to wrap up his investigation. We don't know when. And I would not be surprised to see Rudy Giuliani reappear there because that seems like a much safer thing. You know, anytime Rudy gets asked about specific conversations or about what Trump said versus what the truth is, and Rudy Giuliani doesn't know, should I move the goalpost? Should I deny that it was ever said? Should I say, yeah, actually, all that stuff is true, but it's not really a crime, or it's no big deal? Of course, the president talked to Michael Cohen before his testimony, whatever. That is not a good role for Rudy Giuliani. just downplaying the impact or the importance or significance of the Mueller report maybe is a safer bet for Rudy. So we may see him back, but clearly pulled because of disaster after disaster that he was participating in. Next question today. Hey, David, after Donald Trump is gone, whether it's in 2 years or 6 years, how long will it take for the United States to be respected again? Depends who you ask, okay? So Trumpists believe that the United States is more respectable now under Donald Trump than it ever was under President Barack Obama. Now, that happens to run counter to the facts and what we know about world opinion of the United States under Bush, where it was down, under Obama, where it recovered, and now under Donald Trump, where it is low. And it's not just opinion for the sake of opinion. When public opinion is low, when we are no longer respected by the world leaders around the world, including at our so-called allies like Canada and France and Germany and the UK, this is not just a problem ideologically. It's a problem geopolitically. It's a problem when it comes to national security. And it's a problem economically as well, okay? Economically, when the U.S. is not respected around the world because the president is a laughingstock, travel struggles, and we're seeing that as it is. The number of companies and organizations around the world that say, let's look to the U.S. for the cutting edge on green energy or the cutting edge on whatever technology, that doesn't happen, and that's not good for the United States economically. When it comes to world leaders, the serious conversations about a growing number of issues around the world no longer include the United States because Trump's presence wouldn't be good. And what's he going to do? Send Ivanka as he's been doing before? That's not good either. So on issues like climate change, we see that increasingly Donald Trump, after announcing that he's pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords, he's not even invited to many of the serious discussions about what to do with the climate. I mean, after all, he said climate change is a hoax developed by China in order to bolster their manufacturing industry. When it comes to dealing with geopolitical issues that involve countries that seem to have Trump over a barrel, like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, the United States more and more is not a player. Another sort of crossover geopolitical and economic impact of Donald Trump not being respected and the U.S. not being respected is the move away from the dollar. We've seen a lot of major powers, China, Russia, others, who are moving away from the dollar as a reserve currency, as a trading currency. The tariffs that Donald Trump put in place, then waited on putting in place additional ones in China because the negotiations were going well, even though it seems that they actually weren't. We don't really know what's going on. In any case, all of that is hurting the US dollar. So all of these things are going to take a long time. There is so much, at the beginning, I would say some of these executive orders are not really doing anything. They are just statements of support from the administration for a particular point of view or a particular perspective or whatever. And they can be undone because they don't really do anything. We're well beyond that. The economic repercussions, the repercussions in terms of how our allies see us, it's going to be years. I don't want to say it will be a full presidential term after Trump is gone, but it's not going to be new American president is sworn in and 3 weeks later, everything is back to the way it was. It's not going to be that way with our alliances and relationships with other countries, and it's not going to be that way economically either. It's going to take a while to make up for this. Hey, David, there's a lot of discussion about taxing the very rich at 70% or higher. Where specifically would you set the 70% tax bracket to begin? Okay, very good question. When we talk about higher marginal tax rates, we're not talking about, for example, when we say the top rate should be 70%, we're not saying you take rich people and you tax them 70% on all of their income. We are saying income above a certain threshold is taxed at 70%. So you might, imagine we set the 70% marginal rate at $10 million. You would pay 36% federally or whatever it is on your first $400,000, $500,000 in income. We might establish a 42% rate on income between $500,000 and $1.5 million. between 1.5 million and 10 million, you might pay 55%. And then on that income above 10 million, you would start to pay the 70% marginal tax rate. I have seen good plans, good proposals that would start the 70% rate at 5 million, 10 million, and 20 million. Now, you might say, David, you could make $18 million and not pay the top rate. That seems insane. That seems like an incredible continued handout to the very rich. And in a sense, it is. But what you have to understand is that the very, very wealthy are often not earning income via wages. They're earning income via investments and business distributions. And those are, depending on how they're set up, not taxed at the income tax rate. So you could have someone who earns a salary of $500,000, and then that is subject to income tax on wages. And then they might get $20 million through other mechanisms where it's only subject to the capital gains tax. So that's why if we're really going to have a serious conversation about deciding that as a country, as a society, the very rich have to pay more, you're going to have to deal with capital gains because, as has been pointed out before, the marginal tax rate alone doesn't dictate effective levels of taxation. And what I mean by effective is not that they work well. I mean actual. So like, what is the actual effective tax rate that you're paying? You're going to have to deal with capital gains for those very, very rich people. But I want to then go even further with this for a moment. It's really important not to allow the super rich to control the narrative on this issue, because in every way, the language that's used to discuss this topic, the language that's used to discuss a lot of related topics that are important to how much money are the plutocrats and the corporations and the kleptocrats going to end up with, the language and the discourse is deliberately narrowed in a way that systemically favors the rich. So the focus needs to be, initially, it's not about the top 20%, although the top 20% is important, but the top 20% includes people who are making a lot less than you might imagine. It's not even about the top 10%. It's not even about the top 5%. The level of inequality between the top 0.1%, the top 0.5%, and the top 1% is enormous. And what we have to remember when we think about levels of taxation is that this is not about, although we should have this conversation, it's not about drastically increasing the taxes paid by someone who makes $421,000 a year, which puts them at the very bottom of the top 1%. This is about the top 0.5%, the top 0.1%, and the top 0.01%. And if you're going to deal with that seriously, just taxing earned income, wages, is not going to be the way to do it. But I've sort of gone on a complete tangent. I've seen reasonable plans where the top rate kicks in at 5, 10, or 20 million. And I am sort of leaning towards the 5 or 10 million as the place where I would have that kick in. Let me know what you think. Let me know about your ideas regarding tax brackets and capital gains and what else needs to happen. We've got a great, great bonus show for you today. Become a member at www.joinpacman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show to get instant access to the world famous bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.